My name is Rachel Monroe, and on September 3rd, 2023, my life changed forever. In a single moment, everything I thought I knew about God, about prayer, about eternity, was shattered. For exactly 6 minutes and 13 seconds, I was dead. No heartbeat, no breath, no life left in my body. And in those 6 minutes, I was taken somewhere I never imagined I would go. I stood before Jesus Christ himself, and he revealed something so profound, so terrifying, and so beautiful that it completely changed the way I see everything. What he showed me about prayer was nothing like what I had been taught, nothing like what I had believed. It was the raw, absolute truth, and once I saw it, I could never go back to the way I used to live. That day started like any other. It was the first school field trip of the year, and as a high school science teacher, I had spent the entire morning wrangling restless teenagers onto a bus, making sure everyone had their permission slips, and reminding them not to wander off once we arrived. The Science Museum was one of my favorite places to bring my students. It was full of hands-on exhibits, massive planetarium shows, and exciting live demonstrations. The kids always loved the electricity exhibit the most, the Tesla coil demonstration, in particular, where a presenter would explain how energy flows through the human body. I had seen it before. I had stood in the exact same spot at the front of the group, smiling as students gasped in amazement when the scientist demonstrated how static electricity could lift their hair, or how a small charge could make a bulb glow in their hands. It was all perfectly safe, until it wasn't. The moment it happened, I had no time to react. 1 second, I was standing with my students, listening to the presenter explain how the machine worked. The next, there was a blinding flash of light, an ear-splitting crack, and then a pain so intense it felt as if my entire body had been set on fire. It wasn't just pain, it was something far worse. Every nerve in my body exploded at once, my muscles locked, and my chest felt like it had been crushed beneath a massive weight. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My vision blurred. I felt my knees give out beneath me. And then, suddenly, there was nothing at all. I didn't feel myself hit the ground. I didn't hear the panicked screams of my students or see the paramedics rush into the room. I didn't hear my colleague, Mrs. Dawson, shouting my name as she tried to shake me awake. Because at that moment, I was no longer there. My body was lying lifeless on the cold museum floor, but I had already left it behind. The first thing I became aware of was how incredibly light I felt. It was as if the weight of the entire world had been lifted from me. No pain. No fear, no confusion, just a strange, peaceful detachment. I found myself floating above the scene, watching everything unfold as if I were an invisible observer. I could see my body lying motionless, my skin pale and lifeless, while people frantically worked to revive me. My students stood frozen in horror, some crying, others unable to comprehend what had just happened. The paramedics moved with urgency, shouting medical jargon I didn't understand, pushing down on my chest, trying to force life back into my body. I tried to speak, to tell them that I was fine, that I was still here, but no sound came out. No one could see me. No one could hear me. I wasn't part of that world anymore. I was something else, something untethered from the reality I had always known. And then, in an instant, I was pulled away. I felt myself moving fast. It wasn't like flying. It wasn't like falling. It was something entirely different, as if an unseen force was carrying me upward through an endless tunnel of light. The deeper I went, the more everything I had once known faded away. The sounds of the world disappeared. The panic, the fear, the thoughts of my life, they all melted into nothingness. And then I emerged into a place so beautiful, so overwhelming, that my mind could barely comprehend it. The first thing I noticed was the light. It wasn't just surrounding me, it was alive. It pulsed with warmth, radiating love in a way that I had never felt before. The air itself seemed to hum with a divine energy, filling me with a peace so profound that I never wanted to leave. It was more real than anything I had ever known, more vivid than life itself. I knew, without a doubt, that I was standing in the presence of God. And then I saw him. Jesus Christ stood before me, his presence so powerful that I fell to my knees the moment my eyes met his. He wasn't just a figure in a white robe. He wasn't the soft, painted image I had seen in church. He was glory itself, a being of absolute love, absolute holiness, absolute authority. The sheer intensity of his presence was enough to undo me completely. I felt everything I had ever been, every sin, every failure, every moment of doubt laid bare before him. And yet, in that same instant, I felt more love than I had ever known was possible. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was weep. Jesus stepped toward me, his eyes piercing through my soul. Then he spoke, and the sound of his voice was like 1,000 rushing waters, like thunder and music all at once. "Rachel," he said, and the way he said my name sent chills through me. It was as if he had known me forever, as if he had been waiting for this very moment. "You have been asking about prayer." The words hit me like a shockwave. He was right. I had been struggling with prayer for months, maybe even years. I had felt distant from God, like my prayers were nothing more than empty words floating into the void. I had begged him to show me how to pray, to help me understand why I never seemed to hear him, why my prayers always felt unanswered. And now he was standing before me, ready to reveal the truth. "You must see," he said, and suddenly the world around me shifted. I was no longer standing in the radiant light. Instead, I was watching a scene unfold before me, like a vision playing out in real time. I saw myself back on earth, sitting in my bedroom, my hands folded in prayer. I remember this night. It had been just a few weeks before my accident. I had been crying, feeling lost, feeling like my prayers weren't reaching God at all. Then Jesus pointed, and my spiritual eyes were opened. I gasped. I could see my prayer rising from me, but it wasn't words. It was light. Some parts of it were strong and bright, reaching straight up like beams piercing the sky. Other parts were weak, flickering, struggling to rise. And then, to my horror, I saw some of my words falling back down, never reaching heaven at all. I turned to Jesus, my heart pounding. "Why?" I asked. "Why aren't they reaching you?" He looked at me with deep love, but also deep sorrow. Because prayer is not about words. It is about the heart. I felt my entire being tremble at his words. Everything I had thought I knew about prayer, about long, carefully worded prayers, about reciting the right scriptures, about saying all the right things, suddenly felt so small, so meaningless. Jesus reached out his hand, and suddenly I saw others praying. A man in church was praying loudly, eloquently, quoting scripture flawlessly. But his words fell straight to the ground. His prayer had no power. Then I saw a little girl, barely able to form a sentence, whisper, "Jesus, help me." Her prayer shot through the heavens like fire. I turned to Jesus in shock. "I don't understand." His eyes met mine. She meant it. Jesus let me stand in silence for a moment, letting the weight of what I had just seen settle into my soul. My heart was racing, my mind struggling to grasp what I had just witnessed. I had spent my whole life thinking prayer was about saying the right words, about following the right formulas, about making sure my prayers sounded holy enough. But now, in this place, with my own eyes, I was seeing the truth. It had never been about words at all. He raised his hand again, and suddenly the vision changed. I was now in a massive church, the kind you see on television, packed with people. The worship team was on stage. The music was perfect. The voices of the congregation blended together in a powerful, emotional sound. But as I watched, my spiritual eyes were opened again and I gasped. There were dark figures moving through the congregation, whispering in the ears of those praying, pressing their hands over the mouths of some, pulling at the hearts of others. I saw a woman in the front row lifting her hands in worship, but when I looked closer, her heart was filled with bitterness toward another woman sitting just a few seats away. Her prayer, though spoken, never left her lips in the spiritual realm. It never reached heaven. A man in a suit stood near the altar, praying loudly, his words confident, powerful. But when I looked at his heart, I saw that he was praying for people to see him as holy, not for God to be glorified. His words looked beautiful on the outside, but in the spiritual world, they crumbled into dust before they could rise. And then I saw a young boy, no older than 7, kneeling at his seat with his head bowed, whispering softly, "Jesus, I love you." His prayer shot through the darkness like lightning, piercing straight into the heavens. Tears streamed down my face. I turned to Jesus, my voice shaking. "I don't understand. They all think they're praying, but why aren't some of their prayers reaching you?" Jesus' voice was gentle but filled with an undeniable authority. Because prayer is not a performance. It is not about being seen. It is about connection with the Father. Too many have turned it into a ritual, a habit without heart. They speak words, but their hearts are far from me. I felt my soul tremble. Then how should we pray? The vision changed again. I saw a woman sitting alone in her car, tears streaming down her face, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. Her lips barely moved as she whispered, "God, I don't even know if you're listening, but I need you. I don't know what to do." Her prayer, though weak in sound, was a blazing fire in the spiritual world. It was alive, powerful, undeniable. I saw it break through unseen barriers, piercing straight into the throne room of heaven. Jesus turned to me, his eyes filled with love. This is prayer. This is what the Father longs for. A heart that seeks him, not just words that sound good. It is not about length or eloquence. It is about truth, about surrender. I fell to my knees, weeping. Everything I had ever thought about prayer, Everything I had been taught felt so small in the face of what he was showing me. It had never been about the words, the rituals, or the memorized prayers. It had always been about the heart behind them. Jesus knelt beside me, lifting my chin so I could look into his eyes. "Rachel, you must tell them. My people pray, but many do not know me. They say my name, but their hearts are far from me. They ask for blessings, but they do not seek my presence. They want my gifts, but they do not want me. Tell them, prayer is not about getting things from me. It is about being with me. That is the greatest gift." I sobbed, overwhelmed by his words. How many times had I prayed without truly meaning it? How many times had I gone through the motions, treating God like a distant figure rather than my Father? I had spent years talking at God instead of talking to him. Jesus continued, "There is one more thing I must show you before you go back." The light around us dimmed slightly, and suddenly I was standing in another place, a battlefield. But it wasn't a normal battlefield. It was a war being fought in the spiritual realm. I saw people praying with true faith, and their prayers became weapons, swords of fire, shields of light, arrows that shot through the darkness. Every word they spoke pushed back the enemy, destroying demonic strongholds, bringing down barriers that had been blocking their breakthroughs. But then I saw others, people who were praying half-heartedly, distracted, speaking without conviction. Their prayers were weak, barely rising above them before being swatted away by demonic forces. And then I saw something that shook me to my core. There were some who used to pray powerfully, but now their mouths were sealed shut by demonic hands. They had been attacked, discouraged, beaten down by life, and they had stopped praying altogether. Their weapons lay on the ground, forgotten. Their shields were cracked. The demons surrounding them laughed, mocking them for their silence. Jesus turned to me, his expression filled with sorrow. "The enemy knows the power of prayer more than my people do. That is why he works so hard to silence them. If only they understood what happens in the spiritual realm when they pray, they would never stop." I felt my breath hitch. "Lord, what can I do?" Jesus placed a hand on my shoulder. Tell them that every prayer, every single one, has the power to shift reality. But they must believe. They must pray not with their minds, but with their hearts. They must pray with faith, and they must never stop. The battlefield faded, and suddenly I was back in the radiant presence of Jesus. I knew what was coming next. I could feel it. My time was running out. "Rachel," he said softly, "you must go back now." Panic surged through me. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay with him, to stay in the overwhelming love of his presence. I had never felt so whole, so alive, so at peace. "Please," I begged, "don't send me back. I want to stay with you." Jesus smiled, though there was deep sadness in his eyes. "I am always with you, but your work is not done. Go and tell them what you have seen." Everything happened in an instant. The light around me faded, the warmth disappeared, and suddenly I was being pulled downward back into my body. I gasped, my lungs filling with air, my body jerking violently as the paramedics shouted in shock. "She's back! She's back!" The sound of beeping monitors, the frantic voices, the bright fluorescent lights of the hospital room, it all crashed into me at once. I had been dead for 6 minutes and 13 seconds. But what I saw in that time felt like an eternity. Now I am here, and I have one message. Pray. Pray like you never have before. Pray not with your lips, but with your heart. Pray with faith, with fire, with surrender. Never stop. Never let the enemy silence you. Because prayer is not just talking to God. It is the most powerful weapon we have. I don't know why God chose me to see these things, but I know I can't stay silent. This message isn't just for me. It's for you. If you are listening to this, it is not by accident. Jesus is calling you to Him. He is waiting for you. Talk to Him. Today. Right now. And never stop. If this testimony has touched you, don't ignore it. Don't wait. Jesus is calling you now. Pray, not just with words, but with your whole heart. If you've been distant, come back. If you've never known Him, surrender now. He is listening. He always has been, and He always will be.